with the news coming out about Danny Ainge stepping down as the president of basketball operations for the Celtics. It's one of those where it's he's run the Celtics very well, and they've been very competitive over the years. He's always gotten good coaches in there. He's always gotten good teams put together in his tenure there. It's just one of those where I guess maybe he just wants to step away from the game, which is understandable, and I completely get it if that's the case. Or if he just feels like it's time. I don't know. I didn't hear anything about there being like internal pressure to leave the job or not, so I don't think that that's really what's driving this decision. I will say, though, there is something to be said about when Coach K was retiring or thinking about retiring. There was a lot of questions about, like, oh, would Brad Stevens go back to college to take the Duke job? Because obviously he'd be set up there, and that would be a good job, for him and everything if he wants to get back into college basketball, which I think is interesting and definitely an idea for sure. But looking at what we're currently looking at, basically with Danny Ainge and him stepping down at this current moment, I do wonder if that played a role into it, and maybe internally you won't ever hear about it, but internally that played a role. And that's what they got Brad Stevens to stay, is because they were like, hey, we're about to have this massive position open to run the entire organization. How about you do that? And then that's what you get him. I do wonder where they go in coaching for the next coach regime that comes in, especially because his team's such a young, talented team with Jason Tatum and Brown and all of them slowly growing together. And it's a very young team, so they have a lot of growth to happen, and they could get some veterans to change the tide there as well, as experience together. But I'm intrigued to see what they bring in as far as the coaching staff and what Brad Stevens does overall with the team, as far as maybe making decisions. As far as player personnel, he's got probably a lot more pull in that direction, and as well as maybe what coaching staff he wants to bring in. I don't know if he'll maybe want to bring in a coaching staff that he thinks relates most to his coaching style, and that's what he wants to continue the coaching tree in that department, or if he wants to basically pass it on to a whole new coaching regime, get a new kind of feel and intrigue, I guess, going. So it really just depends. I'm kind of curious to see where it goes. I don't know, if you think what you think about this, or
so first reaction is, wow, he's 44. Like, he looks. Yeah. I thought he was like upper 30s and stuff. At least from this picture. This picture's a little bit too complimentary. So he's been coaching or whatever. But who makes like those decisions? Like, is it literally top down from the owner at this point? Is it Danny Ainge in his acting position of GM decides that Brad Stevens will be the takeover for this position? I assume it has to be checked with the higher ups. I'm just kind of curious about how that power dynamic works when you're in that transition period.
I would think that it has to be handled internally, as far as the higher ups make the decision. But I think it's one of those where it's almost a perfect storm of everything. If it works well, it's like a perfect storm of everything, where he wants to step down because he feels it's right. Brad Stevens is there, and he feels Brad Stevens can take over, and so does the ownership. And so then they want to make that change happen as smoothly and swiftly as possible. And if this is happening the day after they lose in the playoffs and are knocked out, that makes me think that this is something that has been a thought for Danny Ainge throughout the whole season. I just, like I said, my overall fear is I wonder if he was almost kind of pushed out a little bit in a way, because they were afraid of losing maybe Brad Stevens to the Coach K, replacement job, or if it was one of those where basically they had said that they told Brad Stevens, like, hey, Danny Ainge is going to quit soon, we'd like you to take over his position. And then that was kind of a behind closed doors agreement kind of thing. That's my whole thing. I just wonder how it occurred. I wonder if the takeover happened organically, with Danny Ainge stepping down and him taking over his position, because it seems almost too perfect. And just knowing sports, that never is, it's never smooth and nice and everybody's happy with the decision when stuff like that happens. So that's where I wonder. But I would say to your question, because I kind of ranted a little bit there, I will say to your question, I think it has to come from ownership. And then I think that you also have to have Danny Ainge be in agreement, as well as Brad Stevens behind closed doors, all of them be in agreement that this is going to happen. So, yeah, and Danny Ainge was kind of a dirty player back in the day, But I will say the fun fact about Danny Ainge, I'm pretty sure if you want to look it up, he was going to be he could have been like a 3-sport athlete if he wanted. So that's pretty wild. And he was like one of the best defenders in the league at the time. Back when he was playing with that Celtics team that had like 5 Hall of Famers on it. So yes, he was a player back in the day. Was a little dirty, but that's mostly because of that era. And he was also a defensive guy. So being a defensive guy in that era, you kind of almost had to be a little dirty just to, be that way. But yes, he was a player during that like ridiculous Larry Bird Celtics times, during early Jordan years, Magic years when that whole thing was happening in the 80s. But go ahead with what you were going to say.
That thought kind of got wiped from my mind. Actually, what I'm asking you about now instead is every time I saw people talking about this, just happened today or yesterday, whatever it was pretty much that I think that they would only be protecting like 2 players in the entire team, and they'd probably be willing to trade everything else if they had to like retool their team. Do you think they have to do that as they're currently constructed, or are they in a place where they just need to retool a couple of pieces and, go for another shot again?
I think that they definitely, I mean, so you're going to have to pay Jason Tatum a massive contract when his rookie contract's up here. I mean, you're going to have to like pay, him a 25 million to 30 million a year contract. So that's coming up. So it's one of those where that obviously takes away some of the flexibility. You're also going to have to pay Jaylen Brown a significant amount of money to keep him there. And so I think it's one of those where they have a great core. I think they just need experience, and I think they need to change it up a little bit as far as the complementary players for those two, because the way that it's currently constructed, it doesn't seem to me it feels like how the 76ers kind of feel every year, where the 76ers are like 2 superstars, but they don't seem to, like, the team around them doesn't seem to complement them each enough to make them like the team to beat in the East, and then they end up winning the whole thing kind of thing. The 76ers are always really good, but then they never are able to go anywhere or do anything with it. So I think it's one of those where I think the Celtics are just currently constructed not well enough as far as complementing their stars in order for them to do enough to win, like, or be a threat to win. Because Jason Tatum dropped like 50 points twice in these playoffs, and he only played like 7 games or 6 games total. So it's one of those where you have great superstar talent there in Jason Tatum. You have good players like Jaylen Brown. You just need to start building a core around them that is way more complementary than what it currently is.